Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm a second year historian at Jesus College, Oxford, and this is a video to give you a bit of advice about your application to Oxford. My last video took you through the things that you need to consider when you're choosing your university, and for those people who've chosen Oxford, this is a video to give you a bit of advice about how to approach the application process. For people like me who've decided to apply to Oxford quite late, it can feel really daunting because there's a lot of things you have to consider, and it can look like everyone else who's applying has been thinking about it for years and years, and in reality that's not the case. So I'm here today to talk you through the things that you need to think about, the ways that you can approach these different sections of the application even if you've only just started thinking about it, and to give you the encouragement you need to know that it's something that you can do and that you'll be able to achieve in the next few months before you apply. So the first thing that you need to consider when you're thinking about your application to Oxford is your personal statement. And many of you will already have been thinking about this because you do need a personal statement for every university that you apply to, but the one for Oxford is slightly different because it has a more academic focus. And so this means that when you're writing your personal statement, you're not only thinking about your extracurriculars, the subject that you've done in class and in your college work, but you're also thinking about you as an academic, as a student, and the way that you've looked into your subject that you're planning on studying and kind of researched it in your own time. And if you haven't been thinking about applying to Oxford for very long, it can be that you haven't even started to think about the ways that you could branch out in your subject field. And so you might think that you have a huge amount of work to do before you put in your application. And my advice would be to kind of focus on the things that you care about most. So it can feel like there's a huge amount of stuff to do, but in reality that isn't the case. You don't need specific work experience for most courses. For some courses it's possible that you do need that, so look into that beforehand. But for the most part you don't need specific work experience, you just need an understanding of the academic field that you're attempting to apply to. So think about the work that you've done in your classes already, or if you haven't had any classes, think about the things that interested you in the subject in the first place and do a bit of research. Think about the tutors that you might have read about when you were looking into the application process. Think about the topics that you are really interested in and do a bit of research to find some articles or some newspapers or some short books that were written by these people or that have these people in them, even like documentaries or TV shows, anything like that that has an engagement with the content that you're interested in, can mean that you can get a good head start on this learning about the academic elements of your course and branching out without stressing about the fact that you don't have that much time to start working on it. So definitely focus on what you are interested in, and make sure that when you write your application you mention the things that you've started to read. Make sure you've read them, obviously, if you put them in your personal statement, but also your thoughts on them, because showing that you're able to think about one or two really good books and have a well-rounded opinion of those is going to give you a much better application than listing 10 or 12 books that you've read. So you don't necessarily need to have a huge volume of information, but you have to have thought about them well and shown that you as a person are a good academic. And so that's how, even if you are only just starting to consider an application to Oxford, you can use the few months that you've got left to really build a good application and build a personal statement that has a lot of good information without stressing too much that you don't have that much time. Along with your personal statement, you also need to be considering written work. So a lot of subjects at Oxford require written work as part of the application, so it would be a good idea, as soon as you decide which subject you want to do some research and work out whether this is required for your course, and if it is, prioritise it as one of the things to look at in the next few weeks and months. You need to be looking back through the tests and assessments that you've done over the time that you've been doing your course so far to work out whether there's any suitable work that you want to submit. Ideally it wants to be work that you've got a good mark in to demonstrate the fact that you have a good attainment level and that you can write a good essay or that you can produce a good piece of work. It might be that you haven't either had the opportunity to do that yet, or that you haven't had a test that would live up to that standard, and if that's the case you really need to be speaking to your class teacher as soon as possible and working out if there's an opportunity for your class or just you to do an assessment in the next couple of months to provide the work that you need for the written work assessment. In terms of preparation for this, it's fairly simple. You just revise for it as much as you would a normal test, and it will only form part of your application. So if it's something that you have to do last minute, it's not the end of the world, but it's definitely a good idea to prioritise it and speak to your teachers as soon as you know that you need to get the written work in to make sure that you are able to submit something for your application. One of the other things that is quite unique to Oxford and a couple of other universities is the use of an entrance exam, and for a lot of courses you will have to take an entrance exam before you get into Oxford as well. And so this is another thing that you need to look up online and do some research for before you decide to put in your application, because it might be something that you need to register for, or it might be something that you need to work out the logistics of how you're exactly going to take the test. This is definitely something that you should go to your teachers or your tutors for as soon as you know that you're going to apply, because they'll probably be able to help with the process and do the research that's needed to work out what test you need to be taking. And they can also provide you some support when you're preparing for the exam itself. There are some schools that will put a huge amount of work into this test, and so it can feel like you're very easily underprepared, but in reality the test is something that tests your thinking and your ability to approach problems more than your knowledge, so it's not something that you need to have a huge amount of specific teaching for. Instead, it's something that you practice for, and so even if you've started to prepare for Oxford quite late, you will still have the time between when you consider putting in your application and when the test actually is to do a bit of research and to do some practice papers to get yourself ready, especially because the tests are usually happen a month or so after the initial application has taken place, so you will definitely have a period between when you know you're going to apply and when you actually have to take the exams. The best way to prepare for exams is to practice and to go through some past papers, to go through any advice that's online and look through any videos that give you suggestions about how to approach the papers. It's something that you can only really get better at with practice, and although you don't necessarily need to practice everything that's available, it's still a good idea to do a fair amount of practice and go through what you can as best as possible. For some people, there might not be a great marking system in place at their school, so when I did mine, my tutor wasn't really very familiar with the HAT test because I did the history test, and so he didn't really know exactly how to mark the work that I'd written, but by the process of going through the tests and writing them and getting his feedback on roughly how well he thought I'd done, it still gave me good experience writing the tests and kind of getting used to the process, even if he couldn't give me specific advice about what I'd written itself. And the tutors who mark the assessments will know this as well. They know that people have had different levels of training to get into the exams, and so your main priority is just making sure that when you go in, you are comfortable, you are happy, and that when you write, you are able to produce something that shows that you're an independent thinker, even if your specific knowledge isn't as good as you hope it could be, because at the end of the day, the test is mostly focused on your thinking and your abilities to work with problems instead of your knowledge itself. So definitely look online for the information that could give you guidance on the specific tests. Make sure you practice, but also don't stress too much that you're underprepared, because a lot of people will be in a similar situation than you, and even the people who aren't will have that taken into account during the application process. The final thing that you need to be considering during the application process is interviews, and I will be doing another video on interviews in more depth, so you don't need to worry too much about them, but it is useful just to start thinking about the interviews when you are applying, because it means that the information will be spread out so you don't get stressed over it instead of it being bunched up in the couple of weeks before your interview starts. So it'd definitely be a good idea to go online and look at some mock interview questions, even if they're not what comes up in your interview itself, because interviews are so varied that it's almost impossible that the questions that you look up will be the specific ones you're asked. They can still give you a good idea about how to answer questions and allow you to practice getting your thoughts into an order and being eloquent and intelligent when you answer this kind of question. The other thing would be to talk to your tutors or your teachers at your school or your college and ask if you can have a mock interview. This will give you a really good idea of how to approach the situation itself, and it will give you a bit of practice. So it doesn't have to be long, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the tutor who understands your topic very well, but just the experience of doing the interview and answering questions from people will be a great help and build your confidence a huge amount. If you don't have that much time to prepare for this, then it's also a good idea to maybe just talk to your friends or your family and ask them to ask you questions, even if they don't know what the answer to the questions are supposed to be, because it can give you experience just kind of thinking on your feet and answering those questions. It's definitely not something that you need to be thinking about too heavily or stressing about, but just kind of plugging away at it and thinking about questions every now and again can really give you a lot of confidence and preparation that will help you when you finally get to the interview process. So after all of this, what is my main advice in terms of your application to Oxford? I would say the first thing is to make sure that you tell someone that you're applying. This is the first thing that you should do once you work out that you've decided to apply to Oxford, because the teachers at your school will be able to help you through the process, even if they aren't that well versed in the system. It's really, really difficult to go through the application process just because there's so much to do and it can be quite stressful. And so having the support of your school or your college can be so much use, and it can be so helpful, and they can put you in connection with the people that you need to talk to. They can help you with the application and also with signing up for all of your kind of assessment tests that you need to take, and so it can really put you in a much better position if you have a bit of support from the school around you. The second thing I would say is definitely use online advice. So look at any advice on the tests that you're going to take, look at any personal statement writing advice, and just look online as well for any of the information that you need in terms of what you need to apply for and what you need to provide with your application, because this can give you kind of all the information that you need, and it can make you much less stressed about the process if everything that you need is already in front of you. The third thing I would say is to try not to stress about the resources or time that you have. It is the case that there will have been people who've been preparing to go into Oxford for a very long time, and it will be the case that there are people who are applying to Oxford with an incredibly good support system from their school or their college, and unfortunately not everybody has these luxuries, but that doesn't mean that you won't be able to get into Oxford. So if you don't have the time, then definitely try to prioritise as much as possible and think about the ways that you can get as much information and as much knowledge about your subject and yourself as possible. And if you don't have the resources, then try to kind of build them yourself, but also surround yourself with people who are willing to support you, because even if you don't have the kind of academic support, having a lot of moral support can really get you through the application process as well. And the university does take these things into account, and they're aware that people are applying from slightly different backgrounds and with different experiences, and so they will try to level the playing field and understand the position that you came from during your application. The final thing I would say is remember that the Oxford deadline for applications is earlier than for a lot of other universities, and if you do decide to apply to Oxford, you absolutely don't want to miss that deadline. So I hope this video has been useful for you. I hope that it has given you a bit of encouragement about the application process and reassured you that it is possible to apply even if you only have a few months before the application is due. Feel free to check out any of the other videos in this series if you're on the application journey. Feel free to comment if you have any questions, and I wish you all of the best with your application.